All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to those in the other coast or the other part of the world. I'm Kyle Keogh here together with Laszlo Bock. We wanted to go talk about demystifying the interview process here at Google. It's a process we developed and honed over years, and actually I'm very happy to have Laszlo here, who's actually led the development and all the honing of the process. But we realize it's a different process than most other companies go through. So we wanted to use this time, hopefully, to demystify it, to talk about why we do it the way we do it, and more importantly, what it means for you and what you should expect if you come through the process. So before we jump into that, my name is Kyle Keogh. I'm a sales director here at Google. I lead our sales to the telecommunications industry. Laszlo and I go way back, though. We actually started working together 12 years ago at a different company, but have had the opportunity to work together for the last couple of years as well.
Yeah.
If Laszlo, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, I'm Laszlo Bock. I lead people operations for Google. And are we going to do backgrounds?
Yes, we are.
Okay. I won't spoil the surprise. But I lead people operations. I've been at Google for about the last 7.5 years. And it is great to be talking to all of you. Thanks for plugging in and tuning in and listening.
Okay. Laszlo has a wide variety of great experiences to come in here. In particular, though, if you get the chance to talk to him, talk about his Baywatch experience.
Mm-hmm. Nice, thanks. Thank you.
Great. So, Laszlo, as we talk about this, people are going to interview in this process, and they think about the process. How should they go through and prepare themselves when they're coming through?
Okay, well, there's a couple things. The most important thing, actually, as you think about preparing for the interview process is it's actually kind of the most important thing are basic interview hygiene kind of things, right? You should know a little bit about the company, you should know the products, you should think about how you use them, you should sort of have some sense of what you want to be when you grow up. Mm-hmm. So nothing that's a surprise to any of you. There's a few things that are a little different in the Google interview process, one of which is we really try to recruit for aptitude, for the ability to learn, the ability to kind of take on new things and incorporate them, the lesson that you learn into what you're doing and build on that. And so it's a little bit different. We'll talk a little more about that. But the preparation is like for most companies, but with a little bit more focus and thinking about kind of what have you learned through your career, how have you kind of stepped up into leadership roles and so on.
Great. So what types of interviews would they actually see then? And will they see different ones or will it be the same thing over?
Yeah, there's a couple of different things. You'll actually probably have pretty similar interviews as an MBA candidate across all the people you meet. In fact, we designed the process so that we try to get as holistic and balanced a perspective of you as you can. And part of that means in the interview process, multiple interviewers will be screening for the same attribute. And the reason for that is we want to make sure we actually have an unbiased view of you. And if one interviewer is wrong, we want another interviewer to actually have a good independent perspective. So as you go through the interview process, there's 4 attributes we screen for. The first and most important, as I alluded to before, is what we call general cognitive ability. There's a lot of research that suggests one of the best predictors of how someone does in their job, and we see this too, is raw intellectual ability, how well people learn, how well they acquire new skills. So we screen for that. The second is leadership ability, and unlike most companies, what we look for is not were you president of the chess club, were you the head of an organization in your MBA program, did you have some fancy title. We look for something we call emergent leadership. And emergent leadership is characterized not by formal authority, but by somebody recognizing there's a vacuum, a void, and stepping in to fill that leadership vacuum, and just as importantly, stepping back out of it. The third thing we look for is cultural fit. And the idea there is not that we want a monoculture. We don't want everyone to be the same. But what we do want is everybody to have sort of a shared sense of curiosity, of conscientiousness, a little bit of humility when it comes to learning and being open to new ideas and that they might be wrong, and that they want to have an impact on the world. And then the last thing we look for, the least important thing actually, is your actual expertise in the area you're interviewing for. What we found is generally you can learn that on the job in most cases, and it kind of falls to the bottom of our list of things we screen for.
Very interesting. So leadership, cognitive ability, Googliness or cultural fit, and role-related knowledge.
That's right.
Very good. How did we determine that role-related knowledge was actually the lowest?
Well, it's funny. When the company was small, the view was, and I'm talking about 1999, 2000, the view was we were going to be taking on a bunch of different areas that nobody knew how to solve. Nobody knew how search worked. Nobody knew how to make, or companies knew how it worked, but it was still an unsolved problem.
Totally.
Nobody knew how to make money at doing it. And so the idea was if you hire people who have done the same thing again and again and again, they're going to see a problem and apply the same solution they've seen in the past. If you hire somebody who doesn't have experience in that area, but is bright and curious and can learn and is willing to step in when needed and lead, they're more likely to come up with a new solution that the world hasn't seen before. And so this looking for cognitive ability stems from wanting people who are going to reinvent the way their jobs work rather than somebody's going to come in and just do the same thing that everyone else does.
So that rolls back a lot to the cognitive ability question then.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
And we used to look more, we still look at GPA for people coming out of business school because it's sort of the most recent experience. But in general, we've changed a lot the way we look at cognitive ability.
Yeah, we used to, the easy way to look at this in a lot of places just to look at test scores, to look at GPAs, and to give brain teasers or case interviews. And we've actually moved away from that. What we found is that for your first couple years out of school, that stuff is a little predictive, but after that it's not. And so we instead have developed a way of screening for cognitive ability by using structured behavioral interviews. It's a specific interviewing technique. And that actually is much more predictive than asking somebody how they did on a GMAT or an SAT or asking for their grades. It's also much more predictive than case interviews, more predictive than brain teasers. So you will be faced with some of those in all likelihood as you interview at Google. Some people still like to use them. But at the end of the day, when we review the offers and the applicants for everybody, the applications from every student, we really actually discount the case interviews at the final review levels and focus more on more general demonstrations of cognitive ability.
And does every offer packet still go before you before it goes out the door?
Half of them. So actually what happens is all our offers, all our candidates, before we make an offer, get reviewed by Larry Page, our CEO. There's a step before that where there's two hiring committees, one that screens all the technical applications and one that screens all the non-technical, sales and finance and business development. And I'm one of the folks who reviews all the non-technical ones. Okay. It's a lot each week, but it's actually important because it's a way of keeping the process objective and making sure we keep a high, consistent bar for the kind of people that we hire at Google.
Fantastic. So we talked a little bit about role-related knowledge. We talked about cognitive ability and the fact that GPA is still important, especially for someone coming out of school, but it's definitely not the be-all, end-all, and we're looking for sort of mental athletes, if you will, people who can take on new challenges as they go forward. Can you talk a little bit more about emergent leadership and how that differs and how someone coming from business school might look at that?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that often comes up when I talk to students on campus is, they say, well, I was at a small company and so I didn't have this exalted title, or well, all my friends were in banking, everyone was a vice president, I wasn't. Does that count against me? None of that stuff matters. What we really care about is not the title, the level, how many people you supervise, none of that stuff. What we care about is, can you articulate examples of times where you have stepped into a leadership vacuum, where you've identified that there's a gap, and come in to solve the problem, and just as importantly, been willing to relinquish power? Because that's the way we work. We divide our problems into sort of small family-sized teams, and nobody's going to have the answer for every problem, and the team's much stronger when you're able to call on the best of everyone whenever it's needed. So that's what we look for.
Very interesting. Is there an example that you could think of that you've had someone, no, I'm putting you on the spot here, that someone's come in and you've interviewed them and they talk about something that'd be relevant for those folks, not I led a 3,000 person organization, because I know you're going to be a lot of senior folks, but something where you'd look at a good tangible example that they could sort of hold their hat on.
Yeah, I mean, the classic example, you see this with folks out of consulting all the time. And it's funny because the sort of the canned narrative is, I was the junior person on the team and the partners weren't listening and I worked with the client and we came up with a great answer. So you get that kind of thing all the time. What really makes those kind of stories distinctive, I remember interviewing one candidate who was a fairly recent MBA grad, and what he talked about was a situation where the client didn't want them around. The client literally said, we hired you, we know you have to be here, go sit in that corner, we don't want you here. And the partners basically said, like, just get your job done, just keep billing, whatever, just do what they say, just go. And this person actually wanted to have more of an impact. And so what ended up happening was this person sort of, slowly sort of built relationships, made friendships with everybody, and found ways to add value. And in the interest of time, I won't go through all the details of the answer, but the short version is, they found ways to insert themselves into a lot of small conversations where they were able to add a little value, and from that built enough credibility to have broader impact. But what was interesting was they then stepped back and let the client be the star in each of those cases, and other people on the teams. And when the project ended and they were doing debriefing, they weren't the person that the partner looked at and said, you are the hero, you saved this. and they didn't care. What they cared about was they had done the right thing.
Mm-hmm. That's actually very true. I mean, I've actually seen a lot of folks I've worked with, like in our job, we're in sales, right? It's to help the client be successful, and then the credit winds its way back to the right spots eventually, right? You can't directly attribute it.
Well, and in a way, even if it doesn't, right? It's your career is kind of a long game, and some things you'll never get credit for, and that's kind of okay. And what we really want are people who, regardless of even the long-term benefit, they just feel there's a right way to kind of think and act and contribute, and that's what motivates them, rather than being the hero of the star.
Interesting. So finishing off on leadership, emergent leadership is not about how you led something directly yourself, but how you had an impact on something and made it bigger than yourself. Your contribution was more than just an individual contributor. You made the whole better because you were part of it.
That's right. Well, and then you also stepped back, right? That willingness to relinquish power is actually an important part of it.
Interesting, because that's a good transition to Googliness, right, or cultural fit. Is the cultural fit of not wanting to always be the star. Can you talk a little bit about sort of Google culture and how someone think about Googliness as they interview?
Yeah, so it's funny. Everybody at the company has a different definition of what it means to be googly, and I tend not to use the phrase myself that much.
I noticed you did and I did, but
yeah.
Sorry, but they're going to get asked it that way.
It's fine. It's a good question. I think it's one of the rising ones on the moderator list, so it's good we address it. I think most people look at it and say, at most companies, they look for something special in a candidate. And something special will be, they run marathons, or they've done a lot of volunteer work, or they've won a certain award. And for us, it's less about that discrete accomplishment, and it's more about how you think about your kind of place at the company and the world. The people that sort of, are most finely attuned with our culture tend to demonstrate that they're motivated by a mission. So there's something meaningful, right? The company has a mission that's not about making money, that's not about selling ads. So people who are motivated by something deeper than traditional sort of MBA metrics tend to be more finely attuned. People who are incredibly curious and have a lot of intellectual resilience. So they like debate, they like argument, and they're okay with being proven wrong and learning. And then people who have kind of a very strong, as I mentioned before, dose of conscientiousness, a sense that, it's not just a job. Their goal is not just to hit their quarterly goals. Their goal is not just to sell a certain amount. That they have a greater sense of ownership for the company. I mean, it's one of the reasons why everyone at Google is eligible for stock, because Larry and Sergey believe all of us should be thinking like owners, not employees. And so people who have that ownership mindset, that conscientiousness, sort of are more attuned with the culture.
Interesting. So yes. So I mean, a lot of it is, do you have the right long-term mission? Is it consistent? Is it a cultural fit there, rather than here's my short-term goals? I love the focus too on resiliency. Right. As much as Google is successful many times over, right, and has had success in other markets, well, a lot of that becomes from resiliency. The early efforts are actually not usually successful. Right. It comes back in the time after, right, in the third and the fourth and the fifth effort, when we actually finally really succeed. I think sometimes people forget.
Well, it's funny. I was having a conversation this morning with Vic Condutra, who leads our social area, and we were talking about how we're looking forward to the end of the year because it's been a really hard year. Like a lot of hard work, a lot of hours. I'm sure you do the same, and we both kind of paused, and we both taken a little time off for Thanksgiving, and kind of came back realizing, from the outside you look at Google and it seems like this great, gleaming, shining thing, and all these products launching and all this focus, and from the inside, you're constantly like working and busting your butt and trying to have impact, and you fail more often than you succeed internally. And so you need people who are able to kind of learn from that rather than have their learning shut down. Yep,
we are definitely an introspective, challenging culture, right? Of like, hey, that was good, that wasn't great, right? To always do better, and it's a great way to learn, right? It can be a little exhausting at moments, but it's a great way to learn. Very good. So I think we covered off on the main 4 areas. We covered off on the cognitive ability, looking at how do you actually really think, and looking for mental athletes, if you will, folks who can do something more long term. We covered off on a leadership that's really emergent leadership, not, hey, I was the head of the chess club, as you mentioned, but something I had an impact well beyond my role, and I knew when to step forward and when to step back. Essentially, sort of like the New York Yankee style, right? You play for the name on the front of the jersey, not the name on the back. We talked about Googliness, in particular, of having the long-term view, consistency with the mission, resiliency, and then talked about role-related knowledge. Is probably less relevant, especially coming out of business school, Right. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. Sorry, Laszlo had to leave for another appointment. We had a couple technical difficulties. If you can imagine that at Google, the technology is still not quite perfect, but hopefully this will work. What we wanted to do is go through and answer a few of the questions that came up on the Google Moderator. These are sort of common questions we hear as people go through the interview process, and so just wanted to go through the sort of the top 5, if you will, if this is helpful. The first question is, my previous work experience was in a different capacity and industry than I want post-MBA. As far as internships, is it better to leverage my prior work experience, or should I do something differently and go directly after the new option that I want? What we'd say is, on the one side, it's very important to make sure that you're going to do something in a field that is where you want to work, right? You don't want to go and do an internship somewhere in sales if you want to be in engineering or in product management. On the flip side, you do want to make sure you set yourself up for success. So I was thinking about the balancing act of that, is making sure you're going to have 12 weeks to really prove yourself and prove the impact that you can have at Google. So I would balance off making sure that you can have an impact, but then also making sure that you don't wind up getting an offer and doing well in one area and saying that's actually not where I want to work. I want to work in a totally separate area. Google is fairly integrated, but it's still somewhat large. So if you want to work in large client sales, but you do smaller client sales, that's probably workable and fine. But if you want to go from engineering, if you're in sales and you want to go to product management, I would encourage you to go straight to product management if that's your long-term passion and only what you'd want to do. Because you want to make sure that should you have a successful summer, you get an offer and you get excited about the opportunity you have afterwards. Second is, how does the referral process work for summer internship applications, and what does the referrer need to do? The referrer just needs to put you in the system online. We do find referrals to be helpful in terms of market validation. Right, as much as we can interview well, having other folks who've worked with you recommend you who are successful Googlers cannot hurt. It's only going to help you sort of get in the door to get the interview and maybe a little bit thereon. So don't worry if you don't have referrers here. But if you do, it's always great. It's always a good, helpful data point for us as we make decisions. And as you know, we're really big on data. Third, in your experience, what have top candidates done to demonstrate their Googliness? So Googliness is an interesting word in that really it's around the cultural fit. We want folks who are excited to come into work every day, who don't see work as a paycheck, but we see work as an opportunity to really have an impact and to develop themselves. So we think about usually things like, are you really interested in the Google mission, right? Does organizing the world's information and making it universally accessible and relevant excite you, right? Because everything we're going to do is really going to be first and foremost around that. Secondly, do you enjoy getting up and making sure you have an impact? And can you do that within a team rather than individually? Right? Well, individual performance is important. We really care about how does this person make Google better. So I focus on those areas that are really going to showcase how you can help Google achieve its aims and how Google is a better place because you're here. That can be things like you've done things in a nonprofit, can be things that you've done at work, but really showing that you're a team player as well as a leader and that you focus on impact, not on process. On the fourth one, what does Google look for potential product marketing internship candidates? The first and foremost thing is technical expertise. We're looking for folks with an engineering background. From a product standpoint, we are still a very engineering-driven company. We want people who can create tremendous, simple, beautiful products for people. We're not interested as much in a Me Too product or something that compares directly relative to the competition. We look at an unmet need in the marketplace and try and build products that do that. If we look at anything from Android to Chrome, to Google Commerce and other areas we've gone into, it has not been, hey, someone else is doing this and we should do it too. And there hasn't been a consumer need that you can look down and say exactly this is the need state. What it has been is an unmet need or an opportunity we look at and we see from consumer behavior, and then you build an amazing product that solves that seamlessly. So we're looking for folks who, one, from an engineering standpoint can do that, and two, from a thought process and innovation standpoint can develop, conceive, and actually deliver on projects that are going to fit an unmet need or even an unknown need. Lastly, the structural behavior interview sounds like a great way to gauge cognitive ability, leadership ability, personal fit, and expertise. How does Google gauge these elements before the interview? So before the interview, we're going to look at, from a cognitive ability standpoint, what you've done recently. Right? If you graduated from college 10 years ago, that's not as important to us. But if you graduated 3 years ago and then went straight to business school, probably is more important to you. What we're looking for is a history of continued success, or if you've had challenges that you've been able to overcome some of them and you've learned tremendously from it and you would benefit from that experience. So we may look at grades, right, for those schools that offer them up, but we're also going to look at what are the things you've done to go above and beyond to have a greater impact. So general cognitive ability can be grades and test scores if they're more recent.
Leadership ability can really be about what did you do and how can we show from the resume that you've done things that show you go above and beyond, and that the team or Google is going to be better because you're here. And then personality, fit, and expertise. We're going to look for the other experiences that you've had that are very consistent with Google's values. From an expertise standpoint, we'll look for what we call role-related knowledge, but it is, as Laszlo pointed out, one of the lower things on the priority list, because we want you to be successful in the job straight out of the gate. We also know that you can learn a lot of those things here at Google, and if you're going to be at Google for a long time, we want to care that we build your career successfully over years, not just deliver in the first 6 months. We want people to be successful at Google for 5, 10, 15 years, and that takes a look at the long term and looking for folks who can adapt and continue to move on. So thanks so much for taking the time. Hopefully that addresses many of your questions, and look forward to hopefully seeing you at Google.